So let's talk about the big uglies, baby. Let's talk about the offensive line because we know Notre Dame's track record for offensive line, and frankly, we're going to see how good that recruiting has been this year with four brand new starters, I should say, going into the offensive line. But this offensive line class, it's a four-man class. Your thoughts on the class as a whole and your grade for them?
So I gave it a B+, and this is the most interesting position group to break down, and I think probably going to be the most controversial. There's two ways to look at this class, and we need to be honest about both of them. The first one is what the class is. What the class is really good. It's a top 10 offensive line class in the country. When you sign two top 100 recruits, then you're doing well. And what's interesting is, you know, the only consensus top 100 recruit, well, no, he technically wasn't. They didn't have a consensus top 100 recruit because SI 99 didn't have Rocco Spindler in the top 100. But as far as Rivals and ESPN, I think the only guy that was a top 100 in all of them, Rivals, 247, and ESPN, was Rocco. And had SI 99 had him in there, he would have been the only consensus. But, you know, that's pretty good. But I think the other way to look at it is what it should have been. And the fact of the matter is they had some poor planning early in the class. They went after some guys that they probably shouldn't have, stayed engaged in some of those players like Lane and Tangwall longer than they should have. When we knew what he was making multiple trips to Michigan and Penn State, wouldn't come back to Notre Dame. That should have told you something a year before he committed somewhere else. Didn't prioritize some other guys like Wyatt Milam. And it ended up, you know, missing on some of their top guys. So the 1-2 is as good as there is in the country, in my opinion. The problem is 3, 4, and 5 aren't as good as some past Notre Dame classes were at 3 and 4. You know, that's just the reality. It's a good class, but you look at like 2014, for example, you had Quentin Nelson, you had Alex Bars, both top 100 recruits, and then your third guy was Sam Mustipher, another top, 250 kind of guy. Caleb Johnson isn't that kind of guy. Joe Alt's not that kind of guy yet, and Pat Coogan is more of a good, solid depth player. So I think it's a very good class, but it had the potential to be even better. It should have been better, and that's why I didn't give it an A-. So that's part of it. But let's put that aside and focus on what this class is. And what this class is, you met your numbers needs +1, and you got some versatility. You got guys can play better, and then beyond the top 2 guys, and we'll dive into specifics, you landed one player that to me could be the difference between this being a B+ class and an A class. And that would be Joe Alt. And we'll dive into that when we get into him. But this is a strong offensive line class. It could have been better, should have been better, yes, but still a very good offensive line class that you're not going to find more than 6 or 7 in the country that were better. There were some, but not a lot. And that's what you need. And you complement it with a strong 2-man group last year. So you overcome your numbers problem last year. You've overcome that to a degree by landing 5 this year, which is important. Now you just need another good year of numbers and high impact talent next year, and you're going to be back on track.
Yeah, well, I got to correct myself because I did say it was a 4-man class, and it's obviously a 5-man class. I was thinking, because we had talked earlier about how they needed 4, and that was in my head. So I apologize. Thanks for pointing it out, Brandon. That's my fault. But it's obviously a 5-man class. And so let's start breaking these guys down individually. Let's start with we'll say local, since it's Indiana, right? Avon, Indiana High School, Blake Fisher.
This is my number 1 player in the class. He was number 2 going into his senior year. It really isn't about Tyler Buckner taking a step back as much, because the only reason Tyler Buckner took a step back was just because he didn't play.
Right.
So there's that uncertainty from an experience standpoint, but it's more about Blake just really having a great senior year. When he signed with Notre Dame, he was a big, strong, physical kid that I just thought he has to move to guard at some point. Like eventually he's going to move to guard. I still would like to see him move to guard because I think he could be a top 15 NFL draft pick as a guard. He could be an All-American, Quentin Nelson-esque type of player at guard. But now I think he could also be really good at tackle. And I didn't feel that coming into a senior year. What I liked about it is he's a big, strong kid that's just better than everybody else he goes against. Yet he still went in this past offseason working, and he's a top 100 recruit. I believe Rivals already had him as a 5-star early. He already was locked into Notre Dame. There was really no reason for him. He's an early enrollee. There was no reason for him to really feel like he had to work really hard to improve his game, and he did. And it may sound kind of trivial to say that, but look, there's a lot of kids that aren't that way.
Yeah.
And so he went out and really reshaped his body. Was in much better shape as a senior. He's always going to be a big kid, but he got rid of some of that baby fat. He just looked, I mean, you saw him, Vince. He just looked a little bit more filled out up top, where it was more, okay, that's some weight room work in there up top, not just you're a big boy by birth. And his game improved. Foot quickness was better. His knee bend was better. He was more agile this year. His conditioning was better. Watching him later in games, he was more, able to kind of just keep playing at a high level. And he didn't lose any power at all. And he's a guy, when you watch SEC teams, this is the kind of kid you always see playing for SEC teams.
Right.
Where do they find these 330-pound guys that can move? Well, Notre Dame found one at Avon, and they're gonna have that guy. And they haven't had a guy with that combination of size and athleticism since Quentin Nelson. I'm not saying he's going to be a generational player like Quentin Nelson. I'm talking skill set, like size, athleticism combination, where he's always going to be big. Somebody said, well, should he lose 20 pounds? No, he shouldn't lose 20 pounds. He should keep staying at where he is. He could just turn some of it into a different type of weight. But this is a massive, massive young man who's surprisingly agile and an absolutely dominant player, and was one of the top recruiters in the class. Not top recruits, top recruiters in the class.
Right.
He was very important to this class staying together. He was the person that kind of dictated who was in or out of the group chats and those kind of things. So he was one of the top recruiters in this class, and you always need guys like that.
Well, let's head over the state line north to Clarkston, Michigan, and let's talk about Rocco Spindler, sir.
This was a big pickup for them. I mean, they had to beat out Penn State and Michigan for him.
Yep.
LSU wanted him. Ohio State wanted him. This is a kid that everybody all over the country wanted. I like Rocco's game a lot. First of all, he's got a great name. I mean,
yes, of course.
He's a guard named Rocco. I mean, that's fitting. DNA is good. His dad, Mark Spindler, played in the NFL for a long time for the Lions.
Boy, yeah.
He's got a wrestling background. I always love lineman wrestling backgrounds, and he's a surprisingly athletic player. He was a guard his whole career, moved to tackle as a senior, and looked good at tackle. I still think he's a guard, but he showed if you need him to, he could go play tackle. Good athlete. I think he's got to work on his pad level, but again, it's not a flexibility thing. It's more of a technique thing. Just coming up high. Quick feet, moves well, change of direction, works well in space, works well at the second level. Really talented player, Vince, that is because of that wrestling background, the technique advancement. He's a 290 plus. He's a guy that you could say, if these are two linemen that could find themselves on the field early in their careers.
Yeah.
Not necessarily that they need to play, but they're just that good that they can beat guys out. And you don't see that very often along the offensive line.
And then it's kind of a two-tiered class, right? You got the two that you just talked about, and then you got the other three. And that's not saying that the other three are just, whatevers. They still come together to make a pretty darn good class, but there's some room to grow for sure. And let's start with Caleb Johnson. He's out of Florida, Ocala Trinity Catholic. I think he's your third-ranked offensive lineman in this class.
For now, yeah. Third-ranked now, fourth-ranked and upside. And we'll get to that here in a second. But I like Caleb Johnson. He's a tough kid. You flipped him from Auburn, one of several kids at Notre Dame flipped this cycle. Strong kid, 6'7". I don't know if he's all a 6'7". It wouldn't surprise me if he's more 6'5.5", but again, long enough.
Okay.
Has good length, but not the kind of length you'd think from a guy that's listed at 6'7". So I think there might be some guard potential for him down the road, but tough kid. He's that phone booth guy, Vince, and you hear this in offensive line play all the time. Like, if you get him in tight quarters, he's going to be really good. He's got to work on, he's a guy that to me doesn't bend great because I don't think he has the great flexibility. He's always going to be a bit tight in the hips.
Yep.
He's always going to play a little bit high, which is why I think maybe guard down the road might be the place for him. He's more of a right tackle guard kind of guy. Tough, strong.
I've got one of those playing baseball for me. He's the right guard on the football team.
Right.
Working on that flexibility.
Right.
Yeah, right.
And that's who he is, but he's a tough kid. He's got good vertical athleticism, like there's two types of athleticism for the offensive line. There's the tackle athleticism where you got to be able to work laterally and you're change of direction. He's not great there, but then there's the other type of athleticism, which is just that off the line burst. And he's got that. He can really hammer you off the line. Got to work on his hand technique a little bit, but you can see it. He's got strong hands. He's a talented kid. He needs time to develop. You know, his is more of a technique flexibility thing, but he's going to get it. He's going to get it. There's not going to be a need for him to come in right away. So, if this is your third guy, he's not a bad third guy to build around. I don't want to make it seem that way, but there's this kind of third guy, and then there's 2017 where you had Aaron Banks, Robert Hainsey, and Josh Lugg. Right. He's not that level yet. And so, again, it's a very good class, but what's the standard we're holding Notre Dame to? That's the thing. But look, if Caleb Johnson is a starter at right tackle or guard for you in 3 or 4 years, you're going to be pretty good.
One of the guys that really intrigues me in this class is Joe Alt, and he's never really played tackle before. He was a tight end in high school. He's from Minnesota. I believe Notre Dame beat out the University of Minnesota for his services. Talk to me about Joe Alt, because I think that he's a very intriguing guy in this class.
He's the guy I was referring to earlier when I said he's the difference between this being a B+ and an A class.
Gotcha.
Because Joe Alt right now is that kind of project guy. He was like 245 pounds when he committed to Notre Dame. He's listed at 280 now. I don't know if he's 280 or not. Whoa. He definitely got bigger as a senior. You'd see it on film, but just anyone can be 300 pounds. Can you be 300 pounds and still be quick and agile and move? If he is 280, from what I saw on his senior film, that's a great sign, because he didn't look any slower. His foot quickness didn't change. His flexibility didn't change. He still played tight end as a senior. And, and he definitely was thicker, but he still moved the same that he did as a 245-pound guy. That's huge. He's another guy with good DNA. I think his dad played football at Iowa. I believe his dad was also a tight end, went to Iowa, became a tackle.
Yeah,
right?
It was the same story. Yeah, right.
Right. And, and so this is a kid that he is that typical low floor, high ceiling offensive lineman. This is the kind of kid that goes to Iowa, goes to Minnesota. No one ever hears of him because he's a 3-star recruit. And then all of a sudden you're like 3 years later, he's an all Big Ten player.
Right.
And you're like, oh, wow, where'd that guy come from? Well, Notre Dame went and found that guy. And kudos to the staff. And here's where I give them credit. They missed on Wyatt Milam and some of those Nolan Rucci and some of those top guys that I think they should have got at least one of. So what do you do about it? You just complain about it and say, oh, woe is us? Or you say, okay, let's go find somebody. Well, this is the kind of replacement you need when you miss on guys like that, because he does have that sort of ceiling that if it all goes right, and again, a lot has to go right, but if it all goes right, you could be saying, like, who ranked Joe Alt as a 3-star? Like, what were you thinking, And so those tools are there. I gave him a 3.5-star grade, which is kind of for me, it's that top 3 to 400 kind of guy. That's where I rank him. But I gave him a 4.5-star upside, which is a top 50 player, because it's one of those guys that right now he's not a top lineman, but he's got some tools that if he pans out, he's going to go way past his current recruiting ranking. And he's a guy that you're looking at as a 2-3 year starter that's going to be drafted in the day 1 or day 2 of the NFL. He has that kind of upside. The difference is Liam Eichenberg had that from day 1. You just needed to refine the technique, but he was big, he was strong, he was athletic. This is a kid who may not ever get there because you don't know how he's going to handle another 20, 30 pounds. But if he can put on that 20, 30 pounds, continue getting stronger, and maintain his athleticism and length, boy, he's got a chance. So low floor, high ceiling guy that if it clicks and they get this one right, now all of a sudden you have that third stud in this class. And now we're talking about this class in a completely different frame. It's going to be different. And that's what I really like about Joe Alt.
And to round out the offensive line class, Notre Dame went into Chicago. Not surprising, because they're usually fairly successful in the Chicagoland area. But they went to Chicago Marist, and they got an interior guy named Pat Coogan. Tell me about Mr. Coogan. Tough kid.
He's listed anywhere between 285 to 300 pounds. He looks at least 285, 290. Another guy, we talked a lot about this on the defensive class, Vince, but a guy that we just didn't get to see a chance to watch him progress because he didn't play his senior year because of, the state canceling football. So we didn't get a chance to see if he could take that next step. Had a chance to see him at camp, at the lineman camp. Tough, gritty kid. He's a typical Midwestern, Minnesota, Illinois, Indiana kind of recruit. Not a great athlete, not the most nimble guy, but a tough, competitive kid. You put him at guard and center, and at the very worst, he's a good backup for you. Yeah. And at best, maybe as a junior, senior, he can go out there and win a starting job at center or guard. And guys like that are good to have. And he's going to be a team player. He's going to be all about Notre Dame and do what he's asked to do. And if you say, hey, be my backup center, he's going to say, thank you, coach. I'll give you everything I got. You need guys like that, because if he was a top 50 recruit and he wasn't playing, those guys are more prone to leave. So he's a guy that to me made a lot of sense. And if you can have a Pat Coogan as your 5th offensive lineman every year, you're going to have good depth. I mean, you're going to have real good depth because he's that kind of Midwestern, tough, gritty kid that's going to give you everything he's got. He's going to be coachable and, have a chance to surprise and be a quality. He's a kind of like John Dirksen. He's not as athletic as Dirksen but he's got a little bit more pop than Dirksen had, but very similar type of career. If he's a 3-year, backup right guard that has to play when his number's called, that's who he can be. And you need some guys like that.
Yeah, there's no question. And Notre Dame has used guys like that in the past. I mean, there's no question. And his name is escaping me, and it's killing me. But last year,
Trevor Ruhlin.
Thank you. Yes,
Another Illinois kid.
That's exactly who I'm talking about. We had him on the radio show, the pregame show this year. And but he's exactly that kid. He's a guy. He's a Notre Dame kid. He was, just a perennial backup, but when his number was called, he went in and he did his business. And he's a guy that you can count on. And if Coogan ends up being that kid, I think that everything will be just fine for him.
You really do need guys like that. Every team needs guys like that. That just,
Absolutely.
hey, I'm part of the group. I'm going to give you everything I got. I'm not going to make waves. I'm going to bust my hump. And if I get my chance, I get my chance. If not, I love being with my brothers and I'm going to be ready when my number's called. And you do need guys like that. So I have no problem with them taking Pat Coogan. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. And, and you need, like I said, he's that great depth guy. And maybe someday, maybe he gets a little bit quicker or the strength program benefits him more than I think it will. And he ends up being a pretty good starter at guard or center. And the other thing too is I think that playing him at center would make a lot of sense. And they need somebody that can play center because right now, if you move Jarrett Patterson, who the heck is your next center? So it'd be nice to have kind of another young center you can groom to be that depth guy. I think would be very important. So I would like to see them behind Zeke Correll. Yeah, because if you move Jarrett Patterson, who are you going to have? It's Zeke Correll and what?
Right.
So it'd be nice to kind of establish some depth there. And I think Pat Coogan's a guy that you could move there and say, hey, we're going to teach you how to play this position and go learn it. And that's a position where I could see him being effective and being a starting caliber player because you can always protect the center with guards. If he's a tough, smart kid, but maybe not the quickest guy, there are things you can do schematically to protect him a little bit. And Coogan has the tools that you would want, and a guy that maybe you'll accept having to protect that guy because he brings toughness, leadership, consistency, those kind of things to the table.